Body, mind and soul then was the next topic that you highlighted as the one that you were least happy with. As I've already said, you can see that there's not as many boxes and we should be able to cover this easier than religious experience. So first top box is for Plato. You have the whole box to write that. So you can write big, you can spread out. So the first box is for Plato. The first top half of the sheet is just for Plato anyway, because this is a key part of the topic.
Amy?
Yes?
Please have our pen lunch run out.
The reason that students don't like this topic, I'm not actually quite sure about, because half of it's Plato and half of it's Aristotle. You've got them in the bag, you know them. Yes, people like Gilbert Ryle are trickier, but they're not that difficult. So the first part of the box is for Plato. Plato sought something permanent and certain. Remember the river quote and Plato's logic of change leading to his world of forms, WOF, his world of forms. What this means is Plato focused upon the idea that this world changes, everything in this world changes. The Heraclitus quote, you can't step in the same river twice, or can you step in the same river twice? Everything in this world changes, so by logic of opposites, a world that changes means there must be an opposite world that does not change. That led him to the idea of the world of forms. Sam, go on.
The whole like logical opposites thing that he bases his argument.
Yeah.
Like what what is it like? I know what it is, but where's his like proof?
I think you've got a fair point about the logic of opposites. If anything, though, that is probably the only part of his argument that actually does make sense, because we do know that everything has an opposite, hot and cold and night and day. Even in mathematics, you've got positive and negative numbers. Everything does work to opposites. How he then jumps to the conclusion that because this world changes, there's a world that doesn't change, yes, that is a leap of logic, and that's absolutely fine to argue that. But the idea of the argument of opposites does actually work. The conclusion he draws, however, does not. Yeah, very good question, Sam, thank you. Plato argues that if permanence cannot be found in this material world, there must exist another world, therefore the soul must be immortal, no beginning, no end, in order to experience this and therefore be separate from this world too. Therefore the soul is the essential and immaterial part of a human. Basically, because there has to be another world that does not change, because there has to be a world separate from our existence, we therefore must have a soul that can go to that place that is therefore immortal and immaterial itself. So what starts out as a logical conclusion can be reduced down to an illogical, what starts out as a logical start, sorry, can conclude quite illogically. Reductio ad absurdum would be fine for something like that. You do have your highlighters in front of you, and don't forget just to summarise briefly. This isn't about writing it all down, this is just about getting the key features there. The next slide has the next box, sorry, has three sections. The first section of the box is just for that. So the first box, the first section of it, is for the qualities of the soul found in the Phaedo. That's his book. Within that, he talks about how the soul is divine, intelligible, which is understandable, uniform, which means constant, indissoluble, so permanent, unchangeable, Can anybody tell me a better word for unchangeable? Immutable, very well done. Eternal, bless you, eternal, perfect and immortal. Under no circumstances do you need to mention all of them in an exam. Under no circumstances do you list them all. You simply use them as a descriptive quality when talking about the soul. So rather than just saying Plato talks about a soul, you would say Plato talks about an immutable, eternal and perfect soul which encounters the world of forms. It's just a way of demonstrating knowledge. You don't have to write a sentence with just these on its own, not necessary. Middle box is for this part. You need to know your disembodied and your embodied. Plato's argument is both disembodied and embodied. Disembodied, not in body. Embodied is in body. How is it both? When the soul goes to the noaton, it doesn't have a body. When the soul is reincarnated, or the process of metempsychosis, then it does have a body, so it's in body again. So that goes in the middle box, please. Please remember, disembodied is not in body. Out of body is incorrect. You can still be alive if you have an out of body experience. Sleep paralysis, for example, is out of body. Disembodied, you're dead. Excellent. Third and final part of the box is for the division of the soul. So you just need to write those different things in the third part of the box. Appetitive, spirited, rational. A lot of you, when you did your key knowledge test, did not remember the three parts of the soul. Big mistake. This is something that examiners would just expect an 18-year-old to be able to remember. It's not difficult. It's not hard to remember 3 words. Appetitive sounds like appetites. That's exactly what it is. It's the appetites of the body's needs. Food, drink, it's the greed. Spirited is our wills and virtues, such as courage, and rational is the intelligent part of us, the rational, the seeking truth element. The rational takes control of the 2 irrational parts, spirited and appetitive. This links, of course, to the charioteer analogy. So underneath you have a picture of the charioteer. Yes, there's no black horse. Don't complain like the other class. Please colour it in, and please draw a charioteer if you really need to. But the charioteer analogy, as found in the Phaedrus, is the idea of the black and the white horse and the charioteer. The charioteer is the rational part of your soul. It's the charioteer is the one that takes control of the 2 horses. The black horse is the appetitive, your body's needs, and it dies with the body. The white horse is the spirited and leads the rational to the noaton. The black and the white horse are in constant battle, constant struggle. It shows and demonstrates that the three parts are always in conflict with each other. This also demonstrates personality. If your black horse is way out of control, then you might be gluttonous and can't stop eating or can't stop sleeping. Spirited is very much, oh, let's just hug trees and be peaceful. Okay, very, very virtuous excessively. Your rational is your OCD. When you're very uptight and pent up, that's your rational, your charity, taking far too much control. It's about getting these three in balance, which is why it was extremely influential to Freud's ideas. If you do have any questions or problems, do ask. I think this is pretty straightforward. Excellent. The box underneath is Plato's views of the body. The body is linked with the horizon, so the whole box is for that slide. You've got a fabulous quote there from Plato: the body is the source of endless trouble. You'd have to re-Google it to find out which book that one was in if you do want to use it, of course. But what he just says is he's so negative about the body. It is the source of endless trouble, endless problems, such as it needs food. At 1 o'clock today, probably 50 minutes from the end of the lesson, you're going to start drifting because all you'll be thinking about is lunchtime. Our body distracts us. When you're hungry, you can't think properly. Same as fears and endless foolery. If you are fearful of something or you're frightened, you can't think rationally. You panic. Same as if you are diseased, don't feel very well, you don't come into college, means you fall behind and your soul's like, educate me, and your body's like, nah, let's have a day off. So when you're diseased, your body leads you astray. And finally, when it's filled with loves and lusts, the idea that when you're in love or out of love, again, your body distracts you from what the soul wants, and that is to be educated, that is to get true knowledge. The body is the body is the prison or the cave. So the symbolism there you can discuss. So not only is the cave this world, the cave can also be seen in the analogy of the cave can also be seen as the body. The prisoner that gets out could be the soul. The three prisoners could be the three parts of the soul. Soul wants to be free of empiricism and illusion, ignorance such as icasia, and be free to experience the forms and true knowledge. Take your time, make sure you're happy with the keywords that are on that slide. All we have to do now is evaluate Plato, then we move on to Descartes. So we've already done Plato. I highly doubt you will get a question on this in the exam in summer. What I mean by this is I mean Plato. You might get a question on the topic still, but Plato and Descartes were the main two people mentioned in last year's soul question. I can't remember off the top of my head what the soul question was, but you are very, very unlikely to get a Plato question again this year. Why? Because he is easy. Examiners know he's easy. This, however, is quite a tricky topic. It's a tricky topic to control and get all the relevant people in the right place. So I definitely say if it is there, go for it, because it will not be one of the most popular questions to do. But there's still certain things an examiner would expect you to know. Things like Plato's 3 parts of the soul, the difference between Plato's 3 parts and Aristotle's 3 parts, you would need to know. You'd need to know your behaviourism or your Dawkins. So there are things that you do need to know for this. So there is potential that it might come up in summer. I doubt it will be this section though. Strengths and weaknesses of Plato then. The box is split. Strengths one side, weaknesses the other. The strengths are, at the end of the day, it did have a major influence on Christian thought. The immortality of the soul, Noaton and heaven are quite similar, and the ideas of reincarnation are similar to Eastern world religions. Please be very, very careful using them as strengths in your exam. So many students just say, oh, because Christianity supports it, and lots of people support Christianity, there must be logic behind it. Yeah, the Nazis followed Hitler. There's still no logic there. So just because lots of people follow something doesn't mean it's right. So do be very careful saying that just because Christians, it's similar to Christianity, therefore it's logical or a strength. No, you're going to have to do better in your argument than that. All it's saying is it's not a standalone argument. It did influence future arguments, but you cannot conclude that therefore because it's done that it's convincing in itself. What is quite convincing though is that it does explain the individuality of people, and it links to Freud's id, ego, superego. The AS question last year in the AS exam was evaluate the view that the thinking mind is separate from the body. Thinking mind separate from the body is basically dualism, strengths and weaknesses of dualism, which is why Plato and Descartes came up most clearly. You might get a question that says critically assess a materialist view of the soul, or materialism is the only way to view the soul, or Gilbert Ryle's category mistake is the only approach to dealing with the ideas surrounding the soul, or something like that. So they might give you a negative or a critics question, which is doable but harder. The weaknesses of Plato are, of course, the problems of the soul. If the soul is immutable, if the soul is perfect and eternal, yet the soul has an element that's linked with the body, which is the appetitive part. Even the charioteer analogy, the black horse dies, the back part of the soul dies. How is it then immutable? How is it that the soul that goes to the Noaton is only 2/3 of a soul? Is the soul no longer complete? And this raises the issue of personal identity. Personal identity is a really important part of this essay. Any essay you get on the soul, talk about personal identity. It basically means who is the person you are before you die? Who is the person after you die? Who is the person experiencing the Noaton, heaven, whatever it might be? Personal identity is definitely one of those buzzwords where you can use it throughout an essay. You often can use it as evaluation against most of the ideas, because anytime someone talks about an afterlife that is not just in a coffin or cremated, questions personal identity. Who is the person experiencing the afterlife? where we're going with the rest of the sheet before we break off from this. You have the arrows from the strengths going to a box underneath. That, of course, therefore, is Descartes. Descartes is the supporter or the strength of Plato. You've then got arrows going from the weaknesses box. That's going to be a Gilbert Ryle. The box at the bottom is his 3 examples. Any Plato-related questions? Okay. Trickier territory then now. Descartes. Whole box, whole slide. Quite a lot on the slide though, so please judge your writing on this one. I've got post-notes if you do run out. He is a substance dualist. He is a supporter of Plato. In his book Meditations and the Passions of the Soul, he talks about the soul. He starts by asking this fundamental question: is there any knowledge so certain that no one may doubt it? Don't forget, he's a rationalist. So he's talking about what knowledge can you absolutely not doubt for certain. He concludes, or he notes, sorry, first of all, that sense experience may be mistaken, just like Plato, for very similar reasons. Again, you would have to explore strengths and weaknesses of that. Is he correct that sense experience can be mistaken? Is he wrong in that conclusion? Is he wrong just because people get colds and cats smell things that he then creates the rest of his argument? Is it fair to do that? Senses can easily be misled. And so this might mean that the material world and even my body, your body, might not even be there, might be an illusion. There is only one certain piece of knowledge that we have, and that is the cogito, the mind. Descartes is fascinating. He is one of the only people at university that I remember studying and actually enjoyed. Very, very complex. Really does mess with the way that you think. Very, very clever though. He is fundamental to this argument. The spec doesn't cover him at all in the depth of what he goes into with this area. He's one of the most fundamental thinkers on the ideas of dualism, body-soul connections, the soul's continuation. But the reason he comes to these conclusions is because he wants to know what is certain, what cannot be doubted. And the one thing you cannot doubt is your own thinking mind. Everything else can be doubted. I don't know you're there. I don't know you exist. I don't know that I am just dreaming. Why I dream of being here, I don't know, but I might just be dreaming. The one thing that you are aware of is your own cogito. Yes. Cable. Cable. Oh, God. How close is it? And of course, he's known for I think, therefore I am.
Is that the cogito?
Yes, so that's the thinking. That's where it comes from. So the cogito is I think. What that quote means, please be very careful using that quote in your exam. Students use that quote and they don't really understand what on earth it means. I spent a whole term at uni just on that quote. The quote itself is significant. Only mention it if you actually are going to talk about it properly and discuss it properly. What it means is that you are only aware of your own thoughts. You're only aware of what's going on in your own head. So because you're thinking and you're aware of your own thinking, you know that you are in existence. Because I don't know what anybody else in this room is thinking, I don't know you exist. The only thing I am absolutely certain of is my own thinking. Therefore, I know that I exist. Lucy, go on.
Well, you said that you don't know like about your dreams and stuff, but your dreams are in your head.
Yes, so from that he would say that you might all just be part of my dream, so you might just be in my head, but the only thing I know that definitely is concrete and certain then is that because it's in my head, I exist.
So you can conclude from the fact that you dreamed that you exist.
Oh, don't worry, no, just stick with what's there, so don't worry about the dreams bit. Don't worry about the dreams bit. So no, just stick with the idea that because the only thing you're certain of is your own thinking process, that's the only thing you're aware of, that means that only you are aware of your own existence. Yeah. Oh yeah, the dreams takes it down a completely, that's a Pandora's box, so yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah, I'll get you one. Let's chop that. We just misplaced her, so it's quite easy. Right, I'll chop. This means the body and soul are wholly separate substances. You then have a quote at the bottom from meditation. Please do jot at least a little bit of that quote down. This is really what gets you the A's and the B's. Post it. Anyone else like a post-it? No problem. Anyone else post-it? Anyone else? So the quote says there is a very great difference between a mind and a body, because a body is by nature divisible, but the mind is not. Another limb was amputated from my body, nothing would be taken from my mind. There's the 3 dots in the middle, which means I have taken part of the quote out. That doesn't affect you though, unless you're going to take the bit between the mind is not, another limb was amputated, so you need to add the 3 dots in if you are going to do that bit. But what that is saying is, even if in your exam you just write a body is by nature divisible, an examiner will go, ooh, that's nice. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words. You don't have to remember large quotes. Even putting another limb was amputated, an examiner wouldn't think, oh, the students just use that randomly, that phrase. No, an examiner would know it's a quote from Descartes. What he's saying is your body can be chopped up into pieces. You can lose a leg, a finger, an arm. It doesn't matter if you lose part of your body because your mind still stays the same. Your mind is not divisible like your body is. Divisible, divided.
Is Gilbert Ryle the weaknesses?
Yes. Sorry, I had to think about that a second, yes. Yeah, because Peter Geach is on the other side. Are you alright, Sam? What are you thinking?
I don't know. Right. So he's trying to argue that the only thing that's certain is the thought. So is he saying that our bodies aren't real?
Yes. Because the only reason you know your body is because of your senses, and your senses can be so easily deceived. Oh yeah, it's...
No, I understand it. I just don't think it adds up.
Because?
Well, like, I don't know, like separate things, like if your arm gets chopped off and then it's not there anymore, then surely that's evidence that you had an arm to start with.
But your mind's still not affected by the arm being removed. So it must show that the body...
Can't move it.
Yeah. I think you're definitely working on evaluation there. I think what Descartes is concluding is the body and mind are so separate, the only thing you can definitely be certain exists is the mind. What you're saying is, yeah, the mind and body might be separate, but you still need...
If only your thoughts were real, then surely you could, like, think something into existence.
Yeah? Oh, like the ontological argument thing, yeah?
Yeah.
I think that, yeah.
What is it? Oh yeah, just because like the only thing that you can be certain of is thought, for instance, doesn't mean that the body's not real.
Yeah.
Just means that you can't prove it using like his criteria.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Fantastic point, very well justified. That would work perfectly fine in an exam, the idea that just because it doesn't fit his criteria doesn't mean the body doesn't exist. Yeah, spot on. Definitely not a Descartes fan.
No, I do not like it. But I don't know.
You don't agree with it?
You're not allowed to be a fan of anyone, are you?
But no, you're going to evaluate everyone.
Then there'd be no weaknesses.
Yeah, very true. Michael, thank you for your email. All right, so Gilbert Ryle time. This is where we start to get into trickier territory. This is the large box to the side. He is a critic of dualism, specifically Descartes though. So you can use him against Plato, but it works better against Descartes and what Descartes is arguing. He says it's a category mistake, which is to mistakenly treat something as one thing when it's a different type of thing. So a category mistake is when you say it's one thing when actually it's another thing. This will make sense in a second. So in the concept of mind, he uses the term ghost in the machine to criticise how Descartes describes the concept of the mind. Students again overuse that quote, ghost in the machine. They think, oh, got it in the bag, fabulous. No, you have to explain what ghost in the machine means. Ghost in the machine is the idea that a machine is the mechanism, the machine is like the body, the ghost basically is the soul. So it's like me saying that there's a ghost in my computer. It's about as logical as saying there's a soul inside the body. Descartes describes the mind as a pilot of the body, and the body itself is a sort of mechanism. This is what Ryle argues is a category error or category mistake. Either is fine. So Descartes describes the mind as a pilot. By mind he means the soul. They're the same. But obviously the topic is called mind, body, soul. So it is about knowing what people call it. So the mind is the pilot of the body. To be clear, Ryle is an analytic philosopher. He is not attempting to create an alternative view. He is simply criticising this as missing conceptual clarity. That's a really nice phrase. Conceptual clarity just means conceptual, concept, the idea, clarity, clear. What he's arguing is Descartes' concept has no clarity. Why? Because he's talking about the body and soul as separate when they're not separate. That's the mistake. So he's talking about the machine or the body as having a separate ghostly component that pilots it. That is a category mistake. That is wrong because he's talking about the soul as one type when it's another type. That other type is part of the body. This is why it does work for dualism, because Plato obviously does separate body and soul, but this is more against Descartes' idea of calling it a pilot. That's all that goes in that box. You could get a question on Gilbert Ryle in your exam. I think it would be a really tough question. However, just writing that, relating it to Plato, weighing up who has the most convincing argument, you're either going to be one side or the other. You're either team soul and body or team body soul together, therefore it's a mistake to argue otherwise. You're going to be one side or the other. So it is frightening or scary on the outset what the question is, but actually easy when you get down to the bare bones of it. So once again, Gilbert Ryle is not presenting an alternative. He's just trying to bring some clarity to the situation being what on earth is dualism. The three examples he gives then, there's three boxes underneath: Cambridge University, the military parade and the cricket match. You don't have to mention all three in your exam. I think if the question was on Gilbert Ryle, I think maybe two would be of value. If it's not on Gilbert Ryle, one would be enough. please summarise them briefly in your boxes. The boxes are small, you don't have to retell stories. But basically, Gilbert Riley's arguing, first of all, with the Cambridge University. A foreign visitor, so someone that doesn't quite know the way things are structured, a foreign visitor goes to the different colleges, libraries, museums, but then asks, where is the university? This is a category mistake. The university is the collection of the individual parts, not something separate. So, for example, you might go to King's College and Fitzwilliam College and St Mary's College. You might go to all the different libraries, you might go to all the different campuses and museums, and then go, well, where's the university? No, the university is all of it. That is Cambridge University. It's a mistake to believe that they're separate parts when they're one whole. Just like it's incorrect to think of the mind as separate from the body. The military parade, a boy watches a military parade with the squadrons, the platoons, the batteries and asks, when will the division arrive? This is a category mistake because all the units make up the division. Finally, a foreign visitor again watches a cricket match with the bails, the stumps, the umpires and asks, where is the team spirit? This is a category mistake as the collective game makes up the team spirit. The reason I give you all three is because you might like one of the examples more than another. I quite like the Cambridge one, but that's because I don't think I've ever talked about cricket ever as an example. And the military words wouldn't come easily to me. Whereas you might prefer one of the two examples more. The box underneath is for that part. In the same way Descartes is guilty of a category mistake. Descartes is assuming that things we experience are either physical or mental, body or mind, but instead, according to Ryle, they are both. Feelings are experienced both physically and mentally. I'll come back to that, think of PTSD in a second. In other words, Ryle is arguing that it's improper to separate the two, body and soul, or body and mind. This is actually a very, very easy argument. It's a bit wordy, a bit waffly, quite easy. And in my view, it's certainly better argued than Dawkins, that just goes, there's a superstitious soul or a scientific dictionary definition soul. Wow, state the obvious. At least Gilbert Ryle gives examples. At least he tries to explain how the mistake has happened. Oh, go on, Sam.
I know, well, I'm pretty sure Ryle gives the Cambridge University
yes.
an example. Does he give
yes, all three are his.
They're all his own.
All his, yes, yeah, good question. If you wanted to give your own example as well, because your own examples are always very valid in the exam. Your own example shows that you are understanding when you're trying to explain. So if I was going to explain this in my exam, I would use the example of college, this college. If Ofsted came into college and went round all the classes, talked to all the students, talked with all the teachers, and then said, where's the college ethos? They've made a category mistake. The college ethos is everything collectively, not a specific part. So in the same way, Descartes is making a category mistake by saying this is the mind and this is the body, when actually they are the same thing. How it links to post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is the idea that people that suffer with post-traumatic stress disorder is a feeling they have. It's not physical. It might be, you know, they might be in a wheelchair, but that it's the feelings that they have, but it has a physical effect on them. People that have post-traumatic stress disorder physically shake, convulse, are fearful, and that fear is physical. It's not just a mental fear. Even though they are no longer in a war-torn situation, it still follows them. And so it's the idea that feelings are not just part of your mind. Feelings aren't just part of your soul, for example, they are physical as well. So there's many things that are both physical and mental together. They're not separate. Again, you would have to explain what you mean by that in the exam. Is there any Gilbert Ryle questions? So on the second side you have 3 boxes at the top. These are for your 3 criticisms, further criticisms of dualism. This means they're critics against both Plato and Descartes. The first is Peter Geach. He says, how can a disembodied soul see the forms this experience is linked to the body and senses? Please, will you put next to it, and this is just something I never thought I'd have to say to students, only links to Plato. Some students use this against Descartes. When did Descartes talk about the world of forms? That is only against Plato, so don't use that against Descartes because it's just laughable. Peter Geach goes on to say this quote is fantastic. You of course can't write it all down, but it's here. Please put in the bubble, go to quote on PowerPoint, but I also want you to get a little bit of it into your notes. So please let me explain it and read it first, and then you can pick out which bits you want. He says, it is a savage superstition to suppose that a man consists of 2 pieces, body and soul, which come apart at death. The superstition is not mended but aggravated by conceptual confusion if the soul piece is supposed to be immaterial. The genius of Plato and Descartes has given this superstition an undeservedly long lease of life. Oh, it's fabulous. Totally brutal. He is completely off the fence. He is basically calling dualism a savage superstition. You need to look at what those words mean. I'd call a dog savage. If you had a savage dog, you'd put the dog down. Okay? Savage is such a strong word. Superstition is something that's people believe but has no foundations of evidence. So he's basically saying that Plato and Descartes have aggravated this savage superstition that body and soul are separate. Again, look at the words he uses, the word like aggravated. If you're aggravated by something, that's a really powerful word. The words conceptual confusion, again, sound complicated. They're not. Conceptual, concept, confusion. They're confusing the concept. The concept is body and soul are separate when they're not. And so because of Plato and Descartes, it is given this superstition an undeserved long lease of life. He even is on the levels of sarcasm when he says the genius of Plato. Sam?
That top box, how can disembodied soul see them?
Yeah.
Is he just saying, like, how can it literally see them?
Yeah. Yeah, how does it experience the forms? We've only ever known our experiences through the body and through seeing things. So how all of a sudden does a soul see things when we only ever see things via a body? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So that is in What Do We Think with God and the Soul. And again, the 2 questions that you did last year when we did this was, what can you say about the language he uses, and do you think he is fair? This has A and B potential all over it. Just writing that though against Plato, which many of you do, you say Plato, blah 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 this, blah 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 that, however Peter Geach calls this a savage superstition. Whoopee woo, who cares? Who is right? Who is convincing? Who is wrong? Who is fair? Just writing that is not evaluation, that is fact. That is what he says. That is not evaluation. Evaluation comes from how you use them to argue something. And so many of you still are making the mistake, and it will cost you dearly in the exam. Some of you still make a mistake because you write someone else's criticisms. That's evaluation. It's not. You have to do something with it. So in my case, I'm team dualism. I'm team body and soul. So I would argue that whilst that is interesting, whilst it is clear what he's arguing, I would argue against it. And again, I'd never use I think, I'd use the language that I gave you, I'd use the critical word language. Meg?
What do you mean by, like, the end bit of it where it says the dualism
So basically, because Plato and Descartes people keep going back over it and learning it, and because of them bringing it up and explaining it, this superstition should have died years and years ago, but because of them, these ideas just keep coming back. And so undeservedly, meaning not deserving, because it's not based on anything meaningful, and so they're just being given a long lease of life when these ideas should have died long ago. Yeah, thank you for your question, Meg. Is there anybody else in here that has a question about Peter Geach? Very, very good stuff. Very good stuff for an essay. It can cost you grades if you don't use him correctly, though. All right, excellent. Middle box then is for his extremely glamorous wife, Gertrude Anscombe. Our first woman in philosophy and Peter Geach's wife. I think her name is actually Gertrude Elizabeth. I don't think I've made that up. I think it is. But anyway, G-E-M Anscombe. Why does she use the letters of her name? Because obviously philosophy is a male-dominated world. A bit like the Harry Potter writer, always stuck with J.K. Why? Because people tend to read things if they think it's written by a man. And so she always stuck with just G-E-M Anscombe. She argues that bodily act is an act of man qua spirit, basically human as a whole. Anything your body does, it's part of your spirit as well. A description of my bodily actions might fully describe how my body is working, but not why it is working. So, for example, I'm typing this PowerPoint. When I was typing the PowerPoint, I was typing the PowerPoint. My fingers are moving over the keys, but that does not explain the action. For that, I need to have a description of thought I am typing, because what she's basically saying is this: it's not revolutionary, it's not particularly gripping, but if it was just your body doing things, that makes no sense. There has to be a mind process behind why you're doing things. So I wasn't just aimlessly typing a PowerPoint. Behind it was the thought process of, I'm doing this because. Mind, body, connected. The body does not work on its own, nor does the mind. Body and mind are needed. Right?
What do these people, like modern philosophers, what is their job? Like, is it just like university lectures and stuff?
Yeah,
I feel like they don't just sit all day, like get paid to think up deep stuff. Like,
think up deep stuff.
Or like they're all like stacking shelves in Sainsbury's and that. Wait. Like, are they all like?
My body is stacking shelves. My mind is thinking why.
Yeah, like
They're all they're all mostly lecturers. They write books, they do talks. So, for example, Peter Vardy, he makes his money from writing books, from talking with students and things like that, yeah. You won't make your millions doing it, Louisa, I don't advise it.
Do any of them have are any of them not lecturers and just do weird, like, random jobs?
Probably. I can't think of any. I mean, people like Bertrand Russell, I don't think Bertrand Russell was a teacher, but he was like a pacifist, an activist for peace. So he did a lot of campaigns. He was very linked in with politics and stuff like that. As far as teaching, I'm not sure. But most of them make their money from books. They're just authors.
No one's like hundreds of years ago were very rich and...
Yeah, they were authors, but a lot of them published books once they were dead as well.
Amy,
Yes.
could you not argue that the reason your mind is doing it is for your capacity, so your body wanting something like a green?
Oh yes, yeah. So as a weakness that their mind is actually, your body's actually more in control than your mind. Is that what you mean? Eh?
Like, yeah, because like you type a PowerPoint so that you're good at your job, so you don't get sacked, so you stay in your job.
Yeah. So I'm doing it for bodily needs. Yeah, I like that. So you've actually flipped, rather than the mind being in control, actually the body's in control and affects the mind. Yeah, I like that.
What's she criticising?
Dualism.
How?
Because she's saying body and soul are not separate, that your body and mind work together. So again, Descartes and Plato are saying mind does its own thing, body does its own thing, and the soul is controlling the mind. What she's saying is no, they're equal. Your body doesn't do anything without the mind, but the mind's also linked with the body, and they're just the same thing.
I don't think Plato or Descartes are saying that it doesn't do that though.
Yeah, fair enough, fair point. Because
that's why I had to find that pineal gland or whatever, right? He was saying it was an interaction.
yeah,
He wasn't saying they were completely separate.
yeah. So
So she's just
I mean,
she's just saying, oh, like it's this instead of that, but it's not. Her argument isn't disproving it.
yeah, that's fair. That her argument doesn't actually disprove anything. She's just pointing something out. Descartes does say the body and mind do interact. There is a level of interactionism there. Plato just says the body is a prison and a cave and the soul wants to leave as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that works as far as Descartes, that Descartes is arguing there is some interaction there which would go along with that point as well. So her argument, her criticism doesn't necessarily work. Yeah, nicely put. Third box then, further problems for dualism. How can the spiritual soul mind influence or direct anything in a material physical body and vice versa? This is known as the problem of interactionism. Basically, how can a physical body affect a non-physical mind? How can a non-physical mind affect a body? Which one affects which one more? How do they do it? How do they interact?
Alright.
Yeah, no, go on, Lisa.
So soul and mind is supposed to be the same thing.
Yeah.
I feel
Well-
like
well-
it's all like soul, but everyone else is like mind. It's like,
As far as not making things complicated, we're just dealing with soul and mind implying the same thing. On a higher level or a deeper level, they are quite different. But if you start to work out why does Plato use the word soul, why does Descartes use the word mind, you're opening a minefield you just do not need at this level. If you did this at university, then there is quite a distinction. But at the moment, we are just doing it as there's a clear two ways view. You're either soul, mind, or your materialism, just body. Otherwise, you do complicate things quite a lot.
yeah,
Yes.
it's like soul's like not so physical, but mind, like your brain.
Yeah, people link mind to brain, rationale, whereas people often link soul to conscience, personality. So yes, I think your question is very good, Louisa, and I think that your point is very good. I think you'll open a can of worms we don't need. Clearly it seems that if I hurt my body, my mind feels it. Phantom limbs, this is what Sam was pointing out earlier with the idea of having an arm amputated and things like that. You still feel it. So phantom limbs is the idea of people that no longer have a limb, like a missing leg or something like that, they still actually feel pain in that leg, even though that leg is not there. And so often war victims or amputees still feel pain even though the limb is no longer there. And so it does show that the mind does experience things quite strongly for the body. Alfie, go on.
I was say, like, when people do brain scans, like they used to do experiments with brain scans, like they poke in someone's toe, and then certain chemicals would rush and take away.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So if they did something at your, like you said, the pin at the toe, something does happen in the brain and the chemicals and everything
Yeah,
like that, and in your mind and your reaction to it. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fair example to use as well. This is all in the third box, please. Or how the mind feels sensations of hunger and thirst when your body needs nourishment. Maybe that's just me, but when my body's hungry, my mind's like, oh, give me food. Everything's connected. There isn't just one or the other. And think of Siddhartha Gautama, Buddha. He believed that on his journey to enlightenment, he thought that just by starving himself, by focusing purely on his mind and his meditation, that he would reach enlightenment. Wrong move. He nearly died, and it was actually when he finally passed out that somebody was walking past with a goat, as they do, and he gave him goat's milk, and he brought him back around, and Siddhartha Gautama thought, oh, I have to nourish my body as well as my mind, because my mind can't do anything without my body. And so he realised that food was necessary to reach enlightenment. You don't have to go into great...
Porridge.
Porridge?
I swear it was porridge.
No one made the Buddha porridge.
I swear it was like porridge or something.
No, it was goat's milk. I'm pretty sure it was goat's milk. I don't think it would be porridge.
Have a quick go.
Quaker oats, would you like? Maple syrup, berries. How on earth would somebody make porridge for somebody in like
Yeah, some
How
sort
good.
of
Oh, like
porridge.
walking down the
Some
street.
nuts, innit?
Porridge. It'd have some
Yeah.
dying man.
He's googling it now though, aren't you, Sam? He's checking. I'm sure the Buddha.
Maybe it was just curdled milk.
Yeah, lumpy milk.
Well, what country was
No,
it?
I swear it was like porridge with onions.
India's be quite hot.
Yeah. Not gonna have porridge in it, just like Indian curry porridge.
So even at the high stages of meditation, when the mind can turn off from the body still needs to be nourished. So even at the highest points of it, the body still needs to be nourished. So there is connection between the body and mind. They do interact. They are needed. It isn't just a prison or a cave. What have you typed into Google, Sam? What was the Buddha given?
No, I've typed in whatever his name is.
Siddhartha Gautama.
Enlightenment story, isn't it?
Yeah. But at the bottom, you do have a final question. Is it possible to have mind over matter? So this is where it flips it again on its head, hence the discussion. For example, if you watch Derren Brown, obviously most of you will have come across a lot of what Derren Brown does.
That was a bowl of rice.
Was it rice?
Yeah, well,
How would? Are you sure? When he was, he
because
passed
he
out
passed
on a.
out in a river, didn't he?
No, that was in a
And
river.
then- Or
I
some-
thought-
somewhere.
I
and
thought
then
that
the girl
was-
found him, and then she gave him food, and then that's how he found the middle way. So it's like the balance between the two.
Oh no, but wasn't goat's? I think goat's milk was given to him immediately, and then he realised that he could still live on very minimal food to get a nice, but he still needed minimum food. I'm sure when he was practically dying, somebody found him and he gave him goat's milk. I am,
But then eat
and then eat the grain of rice a day after that. Yeah. So you're not wrong, Sam. Well, you are because it's not
Up over there, you look it up and tell me.
it's
sorry, you made up porridge?
But
porridge,
rice
rice.
is a lot closer to what it looks the same. I'm a
Mate, what porridge
visualiser.
are you eating?
And apparently a young village girl, this is what this person said,
There we go.
who lived by the river saw him and brought him a bowl
By the
of
river,
rice
see,
and milk.
I said there was a river. I
Yeah.
said there was a
There's like
river.
there's loads of different versions. Porridge in there somewhere.
Well, the point still stands that whether it's goat's milk or not, the point still stands that Siddhartha Gautama needed food. Whether that food was porridge, please don't write porridge exam, rice, water, goat's milk, he still needed food. However, the point I was going to say last of all is, can you actually have mind over matter? Going back to the Derren Brown. Derren Brown actually walks and lays on glass, broken glass. Somebody then stands on him and he doesn't actually cut himself at all. Why? Because he disconnects his mind from his body, and he does it in a certain way where he, and again, it's all I can explain, is he disconnects his mind so that his body isn't connected, and it's very, very clever, probably some trick, but basically you can have mind over matter sometimes. Your mind is a very powerful mechanism, but it's up to you whether you want to argue that means it's separate or still connected.
Is it that monk who set himself on fire in Vietnam?
No, he died.
I was going to say, I think he died.
To sacrifice.
No, but like he set fire and he was just
Oh,
sat
you
there
mean he
like,
was just
I
there,
don't
like-
feel anything.
He was
He
screaming
was on
in pain.
fire.
He was
Well,
on fire.
that's not the...
Yeah.
That's what the story was. That he didn't feel anything. That's what we did in psychology.
Oh. Well, no, bring that in then, but maybe back it up with some statistics or facts. All right, large box underneath is for our good pal Aristotle. There are 2 slides going in this box. You will be able to fit them. However, you do need to just be aware that there are 2 slides going into that large box. So Aristotle, the formal cause gives you its shape and nature. So the formal cause is what gives something its shape and nature. Therefore, the soul is the formal cause. The body is animated by the soul, which gives it life. The soul is the formal of the material is the body. You don't have to go into the 4 causes. This again is something you might want to jot down in the box, but a big mistake it was either done by yourselves or it was done in the mock by the AS. I can't remember where I've come across it, but basically people that get an Aristotle question start rambling on about a prime mover, and it's like it's to do with the soul. What's the prime mover got to do with the soul? What's the four causes in the sculpture analogy got to do with the soul? It doesn't. This is what you talk about. You don't talk about Aristotle as the topic, you talk about Aristotle as the soul man. Soul has not been music soul, yes.
If you're on about like God there.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's religious.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's alright, don't worry. The soul does not survive after death, it's not a separate unity. How can you know that immediately from what you know about Aristotle? Is this because he's a scientist? He's not going to spend his whole life talking about science and cause and effect and potentiality to actuality and background and then go, oh yeah, but there is a mystical world where the soul goes. No. So the soul does not survive after death. It's not a separate unity. This is why he is a dualist, which is, so talk about this very, very loosely. Best thing to do with Aristotle is not pigeonhole him. Don't say he is or isn't a dualist, because he's partly dualist because he does talk about body and soul separate, but he doesn't believe the soul can exist once the body has died. But he's not a materialist because he doesn't just believe in the body. So he's somewhere in between, hence why he's in between on your coverall. There is no person left, just matter. So what that means is when you're dead, you're just a body in a coffin. You're just worm food, whereas there is no person left. Person, personhood, what made you, you. None of that is left, but there's still body and matter. So there is something that makes you a person and there's still something that separates the body, but they're together. They cannot live without each other. Aristotle gives the example of the eye. He says if the eye was the body, its soul would be the capacity to see. He also gives the axe and cutting and the stamp and wax. You must use at least one of them examples in your exam, if not one or two for explanation. That was a massive faux pas last year when people didn't mention one of them examples.
Thank you, sir. I'll leave it there. Is that okay?
Thanks, Gary, no problem.
Thank you.
So the axe is the body, the cutting is the soul, the stamp, the wax would be the body, the stamp would be the soul. The stamp and the wax, what it means is the imprint left in the physical wax. So it's not talking about the actual stamp or licky letter stamp. It's talking about a stamper like you would do in those days. So the stamp is the imprint into the wax. So you can't have an axe without cutting, cutting without an axe. So they both go together, like you can't have a body without a soul without a body. And still be a person. You're doing really well, everyone. I know you're getting a bit tired now.
Anyway.
Yes.
I understand the eye one.
Yeah.
But I don't understand the other two.
Oh, so the axe is the physical axe. The cutting is the imprint. You never get the imprint of an axe without having the axe. So it's just basically saying that you can't get the cut without the axe. So, like, you can't have the soul
And
without
you
the
can't have
body.
the stamp
And you
without
can't
the
get
wax, yeah.
wax. You can't get a stamp in wax without a stamp. So, like, you can't have just wax without it. Like, you can't have the body without the soul. Yeah. The eye and sight one probably does work the best, but it's worth knowing the others. Same box, please. Is he a dualist or a monist? This again is just so that you've got it in your answer so that you are aware. Most scholars agree that he is a dualist. Most scholars. What that means is not Aristotle. Aristotle doesn't go, hi, I'm a dualist. No. This is scholars. Matter, body and soul are needed to animate a living thing, but the two are dependent on each other more than in Plato's thought. So Peter Geach is Team Aristotle. Your savage superstition man is Team Aristotle. Peter Geach says the only tenable conception of the soul is the Aristotelian conception of the soul as the form or actual organisation of the living body. Tenable means reasonable. So in simpler words, the only reasonable concept of the soul is Aristotle's concept that the soul is the formal, or the characteristics of the body. That's what Peter Geach is arguing. Once again, you need to argue whether that's fair, convincing, credible.
Is this all in one box?
That's all in that same big box, yes please. Does anyone need a post-it? Are we all happy with the space? Just so you have an idea of where we're going, we're just going to go into the three elements of Aristotle's soul, very straightforward, then Aquinas, then our materialists, Dawkins and Skinner. So you are doing very, very well for time. The reason why Aristotle's in the middle is because he'll be in the middle of your essay. He's still a scientist like your behaviourisms or your Dawkins. On the other hand, he still recognises the body, soul have different elements or qualities. Has anyone got any Aristotle-related questions? You could get a whole question on Aristotle in your exam. By the time you've explained all this, by the time you've evaluated all of this, and you've maybe compared to Plato or compared to Dawkins, that's your answer. Amir?
Doesn't Aristotle have 3 parts of the...
Coming next, yes, yeah, correct. Alright, so the little box next to it is for Aristotle's 3 parts of the soul. This again, you must remember. You will not get a C grade if you talk about Aristotle in the exam and don't mention these three parts of the soul. This is what I found that many of you did. You waffled on about the sculpture analogy or the prime mover and you were like, oh, I'm sure he talks about rational or something. No, you have to know. So, vegetative is what all living things have. Plants, animals, humans, anything that's alive, anything that's animate. Sorry, not inanimate, animate. Appetitive, just like Plato, but in this sense, appetitive is what animals and humans have, not plants. The appetitive is our desires, urges and emotions, so still very similar to Plato, but Aristotle says that only animals and humans have this. Think of a dog. If you're sat there eating a big fat piece of juicy steak, your dog is probably looking at you, licking its lips, because it's got an urge that it wants your steak. Intellectual is the final part of the soul. This is only found in humans. It is unique to humans. It's our reasoning, thinking, remembering and deciding. A potential criticism is that some people do believe that animals, for example, can reason and think. Some people don't. That again is up to you as far as how you wish to argue. What Aristotle does recognise is that there is a soul found in everything. You again might want to criticise that. You might not think a tree has a soul, even if it's just a vegetative soul. Interesting why it's always the power of 3 as well. 3 for Plato, 3 for Aristotle. 3 days for St. Paul, 3 days in the water for Guru Nanak, 3 days for the crucifixion. There must be some deep thing to do with the number 3.
Can you link Darwin?
Evolution how?
Because you were saying, I was just thinking, like you were saying, some people argue like animals have the reasoning.
Yeah.
And you could just say like humans have all this because we've developed to be like that, like we're an intellectual, not because we have some soul or whatever a different animals, but
lovely.
Because we've evolved to be that way.
Yeah, very clever, Sam. So the idea that we've just evolved with this intellect rather than it being part of the soul, definitely. And the only reason why our thinking is maybe just an evolutionary thought as well is I can't do this, not because I'm an ethically good person, because I don't want someone to kill me in return or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, you only are like the way you are for evolution. Yeah, I like that, Sam. Very clever. All right. Large box underneath then is for Thomas Aquinas. This is where a lot of you weren't quite sure whether he was Team Plato or Team Aristotle. Most of you got it right that he was Team Aristotle because obviously natural law comes from Aristotelian ideas. You just didn't know why. Aristotle says that, again, you don't have to write the quote down, you might just want to make a note of it, or you can write a bit of it. The soul is defined as the first principle of life in living things, for we call living things animate, and those things which we have no life inanimate. Of course, in Summa Theologica, everything's in Summa Theologica. Theologica meaning? Study of God, excellent. So basically he's saying that the soul is part of living things that we call animate or animated, have life. Similar to Aristotle, plants, animals, humans. The soul is not me, but is the principle of life. My life needs the body to be animated. So what he's saying is he's both. He believes body and soul are both necessary. The soul is not me. What that means is it's not just you. You're not just a soul. It is what gives you life, that principle of life. But you need your body as well. You need your body to be alive. The soul is not material. The body is necessary for me to be me. And again, you've got a quote there from him at the bottom. It is clear that man is not soul only. Even if you just write that bit down, it is clear that man is not soul only. You'll remember you'll remember Aquinas from that. But something composed of soul and body. Plato, because he thought that sensation was simply function of the soul, was able to maintain that man was a soul making use of the body. What he's saying there is Plato's argument worked for him because sensation, feeling, was part of the soul. That soul then was in charge of the body. For him, for Aquinas, he believes the soul is linked with the body, not in charge or separate from it. How are we feeling with this topic second time round? Do we still not like it, or is it better? Better? I'm happy with that's alright. Alfie, not as good as religious experience. Oh, this one's harder. Not as hard as religious experience, yeah.
Religious experience just got loads of names in it that don't come up anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely religious experience does have a lot of names, especially when you've got your examples, whereas actually this is just, as I said, two sides with a bit of Aristotle in the middle, and it's fairly easy to argue, yeah. Monday afternoon's lesson we should be able to get through problem of evil. So that leaves us Wednesday and next Friday. Wednesday we should be able to do teleological and maybe even a bit of cosmological. They will not take us long at all. Because next week is the only time we've got. Alright, I am going to move on. Please do go back to the PowerPoint if you haven't quite finished. Long thin box underneath then is for our good friend Dawkins. His arguments for materialism. Richard Dawkins is often recognised as a materialist. He rejects the notion of Plato and Descartes. What a surprise. He also rejects, even mocks, religious ideas of soul and heaven. Nevertheless, he does acknowledge there's a mystery of consciousness. There's something about the way humans function that's a bit of a mystery. However, it will eventually be found by science. That the answer will be found in our DNA and that the answers will be found. He does distinguish between two types of souls. This is again an area that people forget. Soul 1 is the traditional primitive superstition, the religious concept that they're separate substances. Soul 2 is the more scientific version, that it's an intellectual and spiritual power, higher developed moral faculties, feelings, imagination rooted in the body. He, of course, is a, Soul 2 supporter. Why is it necessary that he makes this distinction? People go, well, obviously he's not going to be Soul 1, a superstition, he's going to be Soul 2. Why did he even bother making the distinction? The reason he admits is that there's something there that is more than just evolution, that's something that more than just fight or flight to do with humans. So this links in actually with Sam's point. People have creativity, they have appreciation of literature. That does link into his memes argument as well, though that...
Is that teleological?
Yeah, teleological. That you have memes in order to band together as groups, etc. But he does say that there's part of us that must recognise this, and for him that's the soul. Soul 2, though, of course, not a religious concept. Only got 3 slides left. You're doing really well, everyone. You must know Dawkins' Soul 1, Soul 2. You can't blag it on what you know about Dawkins from other topics. You can link it to things you know from other topics. Making links, synoptic links is fine, so bringing in other topics to use in your evaluation, there's no problem with that. But you can't do it at the expense of not learning Soul 1, Soul 2. Examiners can spot blaggers. All we've got left is Skinner and reductionism. That's it. You might get a question on materialism or behaviourism in your exam. If it talks about materialism, you talk about Dawkins. You then use someone like Plato or Descartes against him. You then evaluate Descartes, Plato with Gilbert Ryle, and then conclude whether is Dawkins right, is Plato or Gilbert Ryle more correct, or maybe the answer is found within Aristotle in the middle. And so you would need to feel comfortable, if you've got a question on materialism, how to argue it. I wouldn't personally believe it, but I would argue that materialism is more convincing. I think it would be easier to do that. Saying that Gilbert Ryle and Dawkins is more convincing, Plato therefore is incorrect. And even though Aristotle presents some interesting ideas, materialism is clearer. Go with what is easier to argue. Examiners won't check what your personal view is, just go with what you can argue. Alright, box underneath then is split into 3. You've got the long part and then the 2 examples underneath. So for the top part, you've got to get that in there. There's actually not much there that you need to get in. Behaviourism is from Skinner. You will have done this if you do psychology, maybe even sociology. Behaviourism is a type of materialism. Behaviourism is fascinating. Very, very interesting argument. Very clever as well. Human thoughts are just learned behaviours. All behaviour is due to conditioning and reinforcing, and everything we do is a result of previous learning. That's how you train animals. You condition them, you reinforce good behaviour, you either negatively or ignore bad behaviour. And so everything you do is a result of previous things you've done where you think, oh, did something good happen there or something bad happen there? That then affects your decision. If your action leads to a good result, you're more likely to do it again. If your action leads to a bad result or negatively reinforced or ignored, you're not likely to repeat it. Because all behaviour is learned. This doesn't just work with animals, this also works with humans. Definitely works with children, pretty much works with students. If I said to you, do this, you get chocolate, you think, oh, I'll do that again, I might get chocolate again. Positive reinforced. Bribery, some people call it. But all it is you're positively reinforcing a behaviour that you want.
Can you use the psychology too?
Definitely bring in psychology, yes. If you've got psychology understandings, bring in other subject knowledge as well. Yeah, definitely, Louisa. Remember, though, that your marker might not have that knowledge, so you have to, again, be very clear. How is it relevant to the question and how are you using it for or against what the question's asking? But yes, fine.
Amy, what about, like, a baby's instinct to, like, grasp? Do you know when the baby's still like, what is it?
Oh, so instincts. So how does a baby get instincts? Or how does even a human, you know, if something's hot, they move their hand away. I think that impulse would just be linked to more evolution than learning. But actual actions that you're conscious of are because of learnt behaviours. So things you actually do or decide not to do is because of previous behaviours, whereas instincts would be more linked with evolution. Yeah, so a baby's, that hand mechanism would be evolution to help them survive. Yeah. But yeah, good question. The box underneath, I'll leave this on for a couple more seconds. The box underneath is for the two examples. We have the baby example. I can't remember. I remember the baby and the rat. I can't remember what he's actually called. It's not called Billy.
Pete,
Albert. Oh, Albert. Albert and the rat, and then you've got Pavlov and his dogs, salivating dogs. So that's where we're going in the two boxes underneath. The boxes are very, very small. Why? Because you don't have to write all of that. You must summarise. You must summarise the stories into those two boxes. So the first story is Watson and Rain in 1920. You first of all need to evaluate the fact it was done so long ago and that they're generalising to a very old study. They're also generalising to a single study, plus the fact that it is severely unethical. The case of little Albert, 9-month-old infant, tested with various stimuli, showed no fear, no problems, showed things like a white rat, a monkey, a rabbit, no bother whatsoever. I'm sure it was the rat, wasn't it?
it was a rabbit.
Was it a rabbit that they showed him, a white rabbit? Yes, it is, sorry, yep, you are. No, a white rat. 11 months, the white rat, yeah, it is a white rat. I think the cases all use rabbits and rats, and I think one of them might be linked to Little Hans and the Freud case and things like that. So it is a white rat. But he showed no concern with it at all at the beginning. But then what they started to do was, what he was afraid, of, was when a hammer was hit on a metal steel bar behind his head. Logically, a 9-month-old baby would cry if a hammer and a loud bang happened behind his head. That's fairly logical. So what they did was, over an 11-month period, just when he was over 11 months, just when he was over 11 months, they presented back the white rat. Seconds later, they hit the hammer on the steel bar behind his head. This was done 7 times over 7 weeks. What happened was that little Albert only had to see the rat and he'd start to cry because he'd associated with the rat that loud bang that scared him. And so a rat that he wasn't afraid of, the loud bang he then associated the rat with that noise. And so what they showed was that through classical conditioning, you can make people have phobias, you can make people afraid of things.
He died when he was like 7.
Yeah, he did die quite young, and I think his mother moved him away, and then they never could uncondition him, and then he died quite young, yes. Yes, yeah, pretty
Did
depressing.
he die as a result of the white
No,
rat?
it's from like disease.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's not like
Yeah.
a white rat got to him on there.
Yeah, yeah, they didn't actually, yes, they didn't actually hit him with the hammer. Pavlov's dogs. During the 1890s, Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov was looking at salivation in dogs in response to being fed. He noticed that the dogs would salivate even when he just entered the room and didn't even bring them food. So basically, they associated him with feeding. Your pets will probably do that. In your household, if you have a dog, especially dogs, if you have a dog, the dog will always go to the person that feeds them most regularly when they're hungry. So I know when we used to have a dog, the dog always used to go to my mum when it was hungry because he knew he'd get fed. When the dog wanted playtime, he'd come to me. If the dog wanted walking, he'd go to my dad. And so he associated different things with different people. That's because of conditioning. You don't need to talk about both of these cases, you just need to talk about one. If you've done another one in psychology you want to talk about instead, please do so. Evaluate the fact that they are unethical, they're not very good methodology, the fact that they are old, the fact that you can't repeat them really because, again, you wouldn't be allowed. The main thing on here is Dennett. This was the one name that a lot of you forgot who he was. Dennett argues against Skinner that it oversimplifies human consciousness, that we just behave like salivating dogs or we just behave through conditioning. This is known as reductionism. So on the top part it says it's widely attacked for being reductionist. That is a fantastic critical word that you can use in many, many arguments. If it's reductionist is meaning reducing things down to far too simpler solutions. So in this case, saying that animals and humans behave in the same way. It is not the case that what is true for animals is also true for us. We don't, for example, behave like pigeons. Just because a rat does this doesn't mean humans do. There is something more to human consciousness than simply explaining things through cause and effect.